Alliance Live. Self-Management Week. Jan Kafiro, Feel Good Forest Bathing. The benefits of nature connection for well-being.
My name's Jan Kafiro, and I'm really delighted to be here today. I hear such wonderful things about what's happening in Scotland in terms of health, social prescribing, and I'm quite envious that we don't have similar systems in England. I'm pleased to be invited to this event. I think self-management, self-care is so important as a powerful intervention in the health of the nation, really. And my personal approach, one of my personal approaches, is through forest bathing. That's what I'm here to talk about today. So I'm going to introduce myself briefly and introduce forest bathing briefly. And then I'm going to talk during the session about the health and well-being benefits of connecting with nature through the senses. I live in the UK. I live in the Midlands, but I'm not from there. I'm from the Dales, from the hills in the north of England, in Yorkshire. I've done a lot of different kinds of work in my life, but there's been a thread of healthcare going through. I trained as a physical therapist in the 1980s. I worked as an NHS physio, and I left that to work as a private holistic therapist, practicing Bowen therapy. It's still hands-on work, but it's a more holistic approach. And in the last few years, I've also been practicing as a nature connection guide, which is taking people into nature and supporting them to connect with the nature that they find through their physical senses. COVID put paid to that because at the very time when everybody really needed this beautiful practice, we couldn't meet up. So I went online, and I didn't know how to do that, but I just thought I haven't got any option. I made an online course, and that's how I work now. When I first started, I was working with children. Now I work with adults mostly. So forest bathing. Forest bathing is a bit of a weird name, I think. It's got nothing to do with water. It doesn't even have to have anything to do with forests or even woodland or even a tree. It's a translation of the Japanese term where this practice started in the 1980s. And it's really more of a feeling of sunbathing. So when we're sunbathing, we're immersing in the warmth and the rays of the sun. And it's the same with forest bathing. We're immersing ourselves in nature and soaking up the benefits that nature is bringing us. The research into the health and well-being benefits are just absolutely mushrooming at the moment. It started off in Japan and Korea, in far Asia, but now universities all over the world are getting really excited about this. And many people are saying, if we could put nature connection into a pill, it would be the next new thing, like after antibiotics. It's amazing. So forest bathing or nature connection is mindfulness in nature, basically. It's going into nature and experiencing nature through our physical senses. So one of the main ways that connecting with nature is benefiting our health and well-being is that it connects us with our alpha brainwave state. So we have different brainwave states depending on what's going on. If we're in danger and we need to be vigilant, that's one state. If we are asleep, that's another state. If we're deeply relaxed and we're kind of lying with the dog on the sofa and drifting off into sleep, that's another state. Alpha brainwave state is the kind of zone we get into after meditation or mindfulness or doing some real physical exercise, and we get that lovely feeling afterwards. Calm, relaxed, but alert and focused. Connecting with nature through the senses, it brings us out of our busy mind. So modern lifestyles take us up into our mind a lot, especially into our left frontal cortex, where we do language, analyzing, numbers. And that's great. We all have to do stuff. That's how we get stuff done. That's how we plan things. But if we live there a lot of the time, the brain becomes exhausted, because we should be shifting between that state and a more calm, cool, relaxed, but alert state, which is the alpha brainwave state. And that's where we come to when we use the senses and we come out of our head and down into our body. That's why so many people love crafts as well. Again, it's using our physical body and it's bringing us out of our head so that our mind can be free to think in a more, have a deeper attention rather than this kind of jumping from one thought to the next. That is the main way, I believe, that nature connection is supporting our well-being. It gets us out of our fight and flight zone into our rest and digest zone, which is the healing zone. That's where we do our physical body's housekeeping. We go around and look for old cells. We clean up, and we heal. We heal scars. We heal internal conditions. So this is very beneficial for our health. When we go into nature and we connect through forest bathing, we go into an alpha brainwave state, and that's one way. It's the active way of actively noticing nature through our senses. And forest bathing is a collection of sweet, innocent, simple, childlike activities that we do that stop the brain in its tracks and stop it whizzing around, and we get down into the body. There are also passive ways that nature is supporting our health and well-being. And I'm going to go over 3 of those now. This is just a taster. The research is just crazy, really, taking off and giving us more and more information about how this is helping us. People believe we've spent about 99% of our evolution in nature. And it's a very strange situation to be in a square room surrounded by hard, flat surfaces. This is not what we were designed for. And it's not what we're expecting when we're born. As babies, we're expecting to be in nature nearly all of the time. So we're also absorbing benefits passively without doing anything, just by being there. The first one I'm going to talk about is to do with sight. And this is the information that we now have about fractals. So fractals are the way that nature organizes itself. Nature has a way of organizing things that are the most efficient. And what we tend to see in nature is patterns. So fractals are patterns, and here's a beautiful example of fractals. This is a fern from my garden. And fractals are a repeating pattern that gets forever smaller. So this fern has a rib and it has leaves. You see that pattern. Then each leaf, if we look more closely, has a rib and leaves. And then if we go really closely in, I hope you can see that, within each leaflet, within each little leaflet there, we have a rib and leaves, and that goes on and on. If I got a spyglass, it would go deeper and deeper. So this is a beautiful example of fractals. And there is something about looking at fractals that is really restful for us. Human beings love these. The reason is that it's very restful because we can see the pattern and we can scan it very quickly. So if one of these was bent and smushed, we would notice it straight away because we see the pattern and then we see where the pattern is different. In a busy city street, there's lots going on, but those things, those cars, those traffic lights, those people, that dog, that pigeon, they're not connected to each other. They're separate entities. And our brain really struggles to make sense of that. So when we're in an urban environment and we haven't got the structure of fractals to be able to scan really quickly and look for danger, the brain kind of goes into overdrive. So fractals have been known about. I think it was coined by a mathematician in the 1970s. But there's a lovely guy called Richard Taylor in Oregon University, and he's done a lot of research in this. He's a physicist, but he's also an artist, and he brought the knowledge of fractals as an art form and the knowledge of fractals as a physical entity together and did functional MRI scans of people while they were given a difficult task. He did something really horrible to them. He made them do a mathematics test and do mental maths, which would just be a nightmare for me. And then he tested how their brain, their neurology was working, how their neural patterns were working, if they did it looking at the numbers on the screen, or if they had a background of fractals. And lo and behold, the people were much more efficient when they were looking at fractals. They became less stressed by the test. So he could measure their stress, and they were 60% less stressed if they were looking at fractals than if they weren't. And also, if they looked at fractals before the test, they became less stressed in the first place. So quicker recovery, 60% quicker recovery, and something like 40% less stress. So just by being in nature and looking at nature, it's no good if we're just walking through nature on our phone or chatting to somebody or like thinking about what we're going to do when we get to work. We've got to look at it. We've got to engage with it. But if we do engage with it, that's all we have to do, is look at leaves. And the examples of fractals in nature are many, many, many. Structures, especially plants, use this. So on a large scale, we could think about being up in a plane and looking down at the earth and seeing the river systems. They are fractals. On a tiny scale, snowflakes. They've got that branching pattern. What do we see in our everyday lives where we live? Because we all live in different places. In my world, I see it in trees. So we get the main trunk, the branches, the smaller branches, the twigs. They're fractals. Ferns are such a beautiful example. There are many fractals within our bodies, actually. We are made of fractals. So in our bodies, if we think about our breathing system, our respiratory system, we've got the trachea, we've got the two bronchi, the bronchioles, the alveoli, and then the little broccoli-like sacs at the end. They're fractals. We are made up of fractals, our nervous system, our circulation system. So that is one way that we can passively, just by going into nature and noticing, reduce our stress, calm ourselves down if we're feeling rattled. And if I'm going to be doing something like giving a webinar online, I go for a walk before I do it. And it puts me into a rested, calm, alert state so that I can be my best. So I recommend that to all of you. And we don't have to go for a walk even. We can have houseplants and connect with those. We can have herbs on the windowsill. We don't have to live in some beautiful wild place. Two more I'm going to talk about very briefly. The second one is sounds. There is some beautiful research done by the people at the Brighton and Sussex Medical School, again using MRIs to look at where people are and what their neurological state is. And they looked at, they compared the brainwaves of people who were listening to natural sounds compared to people who were listening to artificial sounds. People listening to natural sounds, especially bird song, moving water, or wind in the trees, they seem to be three real sweet spots that really do it for UK people, at least. The different people in different cultures might have different positive triggers, but people listening to natural sounds, they became more outward looking. They became relaxed, they became focused, and their stress levels came right down. So this is measurable in cortisol levels as well. But just looking at the brain patterns is enough. Whereas people who were listening to artificial sounds they became more inwardly focused. They weren't looking out at the world, they were kind of tuning into themselves and going into a state that is recognizable in anxiety, depression, and PTSD. So obviously everything's on a scale, but there's two different states of being, and the natural sounds takes us into the more relaxed, alert, and able way of being in this world. And we can use that. We can just find some bird song and play it if we're in a stressful situation. When my father was poorly in hospital, I played him bird song, and he wasn't able to communicate, but I knew that was going in and helping him. And thirdly, phyton-sides. So we've covered sight, fractals, we've covered sound, natural sounds, and phyton-sides. Phyton-sides are chemicals that are given out by plants, and especially trees, and especially conifers. And they're emitting these chemicals all the time. We already know about 40,000 of them, but there's many, many more that we haven't explored yet, I'm sure. And the plants and the trees are doing this for their own reasons. It's to protect themselves from diseases and bugs. But it also has an effect on us. We've been around trees for millennia, and we have evolved alongside these. And Dr. Ching Li, in 2012, he's a researcher in Tokyo, Japan, at the medical school there. He looked at blood samples of people before and after being in a phyton-side environment, breathing in the phyton-sides, and he measured the numbers. He measured cortisol levels, which were greatly reduced. Cortisol being one of the stress hormones that gears our body up for action. But he also measured the natural killer cells. So natural killer cells, NK cells, are lymphocytes that go around the body, they go around in the blood. They're a general immune cell. They don't target one specific bug. They just go around looking for trouble, and they go, it doesn't look quite right. And so they're effective against any kind of pathogen, but they're also seeking out tumor cells and dealing with them before they can do any mischief. So the numbers are just incredible. After a day in the woods, the number of NK cells in the blood had gone up by 40%, and that effect lasted for a week. So 40%, and the NK cells are our first line of defense. We have to wait for the T cells to get mobilized. They're like sitting there, they're the assassins sitting there in the background waiting to get called out. The NK cells are the frontline troops out there all the time, every day. So they will nip a lot of things in the bud before we ever need to call on the T cells. 40% increase in NK cells. And if you had 2 days, so if you have a camping weekend and you have 2 days in nature, you have a 50% increase in NK cells, and that effect lasts for up to a month. So this is really powerful stuff. In our society, we only tend to recognize 5 senses, but there are many, many more senses within the body: proprioception, sense of gravity, sense of where we are in space. There's research going on in all of these areas. And guess what? Forest bathing activates so many of them. So I've just given you a brief overview there. The main thing is that when we go into nature and we notice nature with our senses, with our sight, our hearing, our smell, our touch, we're going to benefit because we're going to go into more of an alpha brainwave state. And passively seeing and noticing fractals, noticing and appreciating the beauty of natural sounds, and breathing in the phytoncides, which very often we can't smell, we can't detect them unless we're very sensitive, but we know that we're breathing them in all the time. Those 3 methods and many, many more are improving our health and well-being, and that benefit carries on. I think it's 2 hours a week, they say, is a tipping point. 2 hours in nature a week. So that's enough of me talking. I hope you found that interesting. I do have a little bit more information on that on my website. You can go and take a look. And I go into the science a bit more in the online course that I run called Coming to Our Senses. So now I'm going to invite you all to a virtual forest bathe. Now, we know that if we do something, and if we vividly imagine ourselves doing something, it takes place in the same part of the brain. And basically the brain doesn't know any different. So if you are able to engage with this imaginary forest bathe really vividly, you're going to get some benefit, just as if you went out for a walk in your lunch break. It's an invitation. Join in if you like. If you don't want to, that's fine. And I'm going to be asking you to close your eyes or look down, to take out the sense of sight so that we can go deep within into our imaginary world. So when you're ready, I'm going to invite you first of all to tune into your breathing. Tune into your physical sensations of breathing. You might be able to feel the air coming into your nostrils. You might feel your chest or your belly rising and falling. When you're ready, I'd like you to think about a tree that you know well. Could be a tree in your garden that you look at from your office window, one that's by the bus stop where you wait in the mornings. I'll just give you a moment to bring up that tree in your mind's eye. And when you're ready, in this imaginary story, there is nobody else about, so you're not going to look foolish. There's no one to see you connecting with this tree. I invite you to walk up to the tree. Walk right up to it. And first of all, look up into the canopy and see how it's moving. Is it a windy day? If it's a windy day, how is it moving? Is it droopy and graceful? Or is it stiffer and swaying? And then I invite you to come closer and to look at the bark. Get really close, like bring your nose right up to it. And look at the details. Is it rough? Is it smooth? The colors. By now, you're probably drawn into the textures. So lift your hands and put them onto the bark and feel the texture of the bark with your hands. Stroke the bark. Can you pick up different information than with your eyes? You might want to put your face up and let your cheek stroke against the bark. The face is very sensitive. We can pick up different information with our faces. While your hands are on the bark, you might be able to feel the movement that you saw up in the canopy. You might be able to feel the tree swaying. You might feel little taps as branches and twigs collide with each other. You might hear them. And finally, I invite you to get your nose really close up to the bark and smell. Take a few deep, satisfying lungfuls of air and see if you can pick up any aromas. There might be a mushroomy smell. If it's a conifer tree, you might smell the resin. And when you're ready, I invite you to step back from the tree. Thank the tree in whatever way feels right to you. Come back to your breathing for a couple of breaths. Feel the air entering and leaving your nostrils. And gently open your eyes and come back to the room. So if you noticed anything, I'd like you to just take a moment to make a few notes on what you noticed, either what you noticed in the tree or what you noticed in yourself noticing the tree. Just become aware of what that experience was like. Even though this is such an artificial situation, even now, I can tell you that your blood pressure has dropped. This is all research-based. Your blood pressure has dropped to a more resting level. Your heart rate, your pulse has slowed to a resting state. The levels of cortisol in your blood, your stress hormones, have reduced back down to baseline. Your perception of pain, if you have any, will be less, will be dulled. And on and on and on it goes. There are so many effects of getting into this soothed state. And the thing is, it's different for everybody. That's what's so beautiful and exciting about Nature Connection for me, is that every single person I've met that I've practiced forest bathing with has a different experience.